They came for me on a Tuesday morning, right there in my rose garden. My own daughter stood at the gate with two strangers in white coats and told them I had lost my mind. She never once looked me in the eye. Her husband was already pricing my home before I had even left it. What none of them knew was that this old school teacher had already prepared the most expensive lesson of their lives. Thank you for being here with me. Before we go any further, take a second and tell me in the comments where you are watching from today. Also, a quick note. Some details in this story are dramatized to better convey the lesson. Any resemblance to real names or situations is unintentional, but the meaning remains absolutely true. I remember that morning like it is tattooed on the inside of my eyelids. It was the second week of April, and the Savannah air was thick with the smell of jasmine and warm earth. I had been up since 5:30, the way I always am. 73 years old and my body still runs on a schoolteacher's clock. 35 years behind a desk will do that to you. Your bones. Remember the bell. Even after the bell stops ringing. My name is Eleanor Hartwell. Most people call me Ellie. I lived, at 714 Abercorn Street, in the historic district of Savannah, Georgia. It is a house my husband Henry and I bought in 1982, back when the neighborhood was still rough around the edges and nobody wanted a crumbling old Victorian with a leaking roof and a yard full of weeds. Henry saw potential. Henry always saw potential. He was a quiet man, a carpenter by trade, who could look at a broken thing and see exactly what it was supposed to be. He spent 20 years turning that house into something beautiful. He sanded the floors himself. He rebuilt the staircase with his own hands. And in the backyard, he built me a garden. Not just any garden. A rose garden with 47 bushes, each one planted for a year of our marriage. And at the front, he forged an iron gate by hand, with scrollwork that curved like the letter E. For Ellie, he said the day he hung it. A garden gate should welcome people in, not keep them out. Remember that, Ellie. Henry passed 5 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. Quick and merciless. One day he was pruning the roses. 8 weeks later, I was standing over his grave with dirt still under my fingernails because I could not stop gardening. It was the only thing that kept me from screaming. After Henry died, I lived alone. I watered the roses every morning. I volunteered at Savannah Elementary, tutoring children in reading and math. I attended church on Sundays. I made my own bread. I drove my 12-year-old Honda Civic to the grocery store every Thursday. I was not lonely. I was peaceful. There is a difference. Most people never learn. My daughter, Victoria, did not understand that difference. Victoria is 41. She is a lawyer, or she was, at a firm downtown. She married a man named Marcus Ashford, a surgeon, 4 years ago. Marcus came from what people in Savannah call a good family. His mother, Diana, wore pearls to breakfast and spoke about summers on Hilton Head as though the island had been personally invented for her. They were, by all appearances, the kind of people who belonged in oil paintings. Victoria called me once a month, sometimes less. The conversations were always short, always polite, always hollow. "How are you, Mom?" "Fine, Victoria." "How is Marcus?" "Fine, Mom." She never asked about the garden. She never asked about the children I tutored. She never asked about Henry's roses. I should have known then. But love is a kind of blindness, and a mother's love is the blindest of all. That Tuesday morning, I was on my knees in the garden bed closest to the gate. I was transplanting a cutting from Henry's favorite bush. A deer? The deep crimson floribunda he had named Diane after his own mother. My hands were caked in dark soil. My gardening gloves were beside me. I was humming a hymn I could not quite remember the words to. The sun was warm on the back of my neck. The mockingbird in the magnolia tree was singing. Then I heard the gate open. I looked up. A white van had pulled into my driveway. It was the kind of van that does not belong in a neighborhood like mine, clinical and windowless, with a small blue logo on the side that read Magnolia Pines Senior Living. Two men in white uniforms stepped out. Behind them, a tall man in a gray suit carrying a leather folder. And behind him, standing just inside my garden gate, was my daughter. Victoria was wearing sunglasses. It was barely 8 in the morning and she was wearing sunglasses. I know now it was because she did not want me to see her eyes. "Mom," she said. Her voice was stiff, rehearsed. "Victoria, what is this? Who are these people?" The man in the gray suit stepped forward. He extended his hand. I did not take it. "Mrs. Hartwell, my name is Dr. Nathan Pierce. I am a psychiatric specialist affiliated with Magnolia Pines. Your daughter and her husband have expressed serious concerns about your cognitive health. Based on our preliminary assessment, we have obtained an emergency protective custody order." He opened the leather folder and held up a document. I could see the county seal. I could see my name, printed in cold black letters. "I am not sick," I said. My voice was steady, but my heart was hammering. I taught volunteer calculus to 12-year-olds last month. I balance my own checkbook. I can name every rose in this garden and tell you the year it was planted. Dr. Pierce did not even look at me. He looked at Victoria. Victoria took off her sunglasses. Her eyes were dry. "She gets confused," she said. "She talks to the roses. She sometimes forgets what day it is. We are just worried about her safety." She was lying. She was lying to a doctor, to the state, to God, and to my face. And she did it without blinking. I opened my mouth to argue, but the two men in white were already beside me. One of them gently but firmly took my arm. "Ma'am, we are just going to take you somewhere safe," he said. I looked at Victoria. I searched her face for something, anything. Guilt, hesitation, a flicker of the little girl who used to sit on my lap and beg me to read one more chapter. But her face was a mask, polished, professional, empty. They guided me to the van. I was still wearing my gardening slippers. My hands were still black with soil. I had not brushed my hair. I had not locked the back door. I did not have my purse, my phone, or my dignity. As they helped me into the back seat, I turned and looked through the window. Marcus was standing on my front porch. He had a set of keys in one hand and his phone in the other. He was taking photographs of the front of my house, and texting them to someone. He was smiling. The engine started. The van began to roll backward down the driveway. And through the glass, I watched the garden gate close behind me. It was the first time in 40 years it had been shut by someone other than me. And as we turned the corner and my home disappeared from view, I saw my daughter still standing in my rose garden, not crying, not looking back, but already on her phone, already making plans for a life that no longer included me. I pressed my soil-stained hands flat against the cold window. I did not cry. I am a teacher, and a teacher knows that the most important lessons are the ones that hurt the most. My daughter had just made the most expensive mistake of her life. She just did not know it yet. Magnolia Pines smelled like bleach and fake lavender. The kind of place that tries very hard to pretend it is not what it is. They had planted magnolia trees along the entrance, and there were window boxes filled with plastic geraniums that fooled no one. The lobby had a crystal chandelier and a grand piano that nobody played. It was beautiful, the way a coffin is beautiful. All polish, no pulse. They checked me in like I was luggage. A woman at the front desk with a tight smile and a lanyard around her neck typed my name into a computer without once looking at my face. She asked me to sign a form. I told her I would not sign anything until I spoke to my daughter. She smiled again, that same empty smile, and said my daughter had already signed everything on my behalf, as if I were a child, as if I had ceased to be a person the moment that van door closed. They led me down a long hallway with fluorescent lights that buzzed like trapped insects. The walls were the color of old teeth. There were framed photographs of smiling elderly couples walking on beaches, The kind of stock images you find in dentist offices. Nobody in this building looked like those people. My room was at the end of the east wing. It was small, maybe 10 by 12, with a single bed, a nightstand, a narrow closet, and a window that looked out onto the parking lot. No trees, no garden, no sky worth watching. Just asphalt and a dumpster and the back end of a delivery truck. I stood in that room and I thought of Henry. I thought of what he told me once when we visited his mother in a facility outside of Augusta. She had dementia. Real dementia. And the place they put her in was clean and bright and utterly soulless. Henry stood in her room, looked around, and said, "A cage is still a cage. Ellie, even if the bars are made of gold. Remember that." I remembered. I remembered everything. That was the cruelest irony of all. They said I had lost my mind, and yet my mind was the sharpest weapon I had left. The first day, they took my phone. A nurse named Brenda, a heavy woman with kind eyes but no courage, came to my room and asked for it. "Doctor's orders," she said. "Screen time can be agitating for patients in your condition." I told her I did not have a condition. She looked at the floor and held out her hand. The second day, I learned the rules. I could eat in the communal dining room at 7, 12, and 5:30. I could sit in the common room between meals. I could walk in the small courtyard garden, which was a generous description for a square patch of grass with 2 benches and a dying boxwood hedge. I could not make phone calls unless my designated family contact, Victoria, authorized it. I could not receive visitors unless Victoria approved them. I could not leave. I was a prisoner. A clean, well-fed, air-conditioned prisoner. But a prisoner all the same. The other residents were a mixed collection of sadness. Some of them truly needed care. Mr. Alderman in room 8 had advanced Parkinson's and could not feed himself. Miss Lorraine on the second floor had severe dementia and called every nurse Dorothy, which was her dead sister's name. These people belonged here, not because they were less, but because they needed help that the world outside could no longer give them. But others, I could see it in their eyes. They were like me, sharp, aware, abandoned. Mrs. Chen in the room next to mine had been placed here by her son after she refused to sell her restaurant. She told me this on my second afternoon while we sat in the common room pretending to watch a television show about antiques. "He said I was too old to run a business," she whispered, her English still carrying the cadence of Cantonese. I told him I had run that restaurant for 37 years. He said that was exactly the problem. I listened. I observed. And I began to write. I did not have a notebook. I did not have a pen. But I had napkins from the dining room and a short pencil I found wedged behind the nightstand drawer, left behind by whoever had occupied this room before me. Every night, after the lights dimmed and the hallway went quiet, I sat on the edge of my bed and I wrote. I wrote the date. I wrote the time. I wrote the names of every nurse, every orderly, every doctor who came through. I wrote what they said, how they said it, and what they did not say. I folded each napkin into a small square and tucked them inside the lining of my pillowcase. 35 years of grading papers had taught me one thing above all else. Documentation is everything. On the evening of my second day, I found something else in that nightstand drawer. Pushed all the way to the back, behind a crumpled tissue and a forgotten button, was a cell phone. It was old. A small flip phone with a cracked screen and a battery icon showing maybe 20%. Whoever had lived in this room before me had either hidden it or forgotten it. I held it in my hands like a grenade. I did not turn it on. Not yet. I was not ready. I needed a plan first. On the third morning, I heard something that changed everything. I was walking past the nurse's station on my way to the dining room when I heard Victoria's voice coming through the desk phone on speaker. The nurse at the station, a young girl named Tammy, did not see me stop. "Do not let her call anyone," Victoria said. Her voice was brisk and professional, the voice she used in court. She gets agitated when she talks to people from her old life. It confuses her. Just keep her comfortable and keep her isolated. It is for her own safety." Tammy glanced up and saw me standing there. She fumbled with the phone and took it off speaker, but it was too late. I had heard every word. My daughter had not just locked me away, she had sealed the door. I walked into the common room. I sat down in a chair by the window. I folded my hands in my lap, and I stared at the dying boxwood hedge in the courtyard. I sat there for a long time, perfectly still, letting the anger settle into something harder and more useful than rage. And then a voice came from the chair beside me. "You are not crazy, are you?" I turned. An elderly man sat in the adjacent armchair. He was tall, even sitting down, with a full head of white hair and eyes so sharp they could cut glass. He was holding a folded copy of the Wall Street Journal, and he was looking at me the way a jeweler looks at an uncut diamond, with recognition. "No," I said. "I am not." He smiled. It was a slow, deliberate smile, the kind that belongs to a man who has spent a lifetime making decisions that change other people's lives. "Good," he said. "My name is Judge Walter Franklin, retired federal bench, Northern District of Georgia. I have been watching you for 3 days, Mrs. Hartwell, and I believe you and I have a great deal to talk about." Judge Walter Franklin was 80 years old, voluntarily living in a nursing home, and sharper than any lawyer I had ever met. And I had met a great many lawyers. I was married to a carpenter, but my daughter married ambition, and ambition always comes with lawyers attached. That first conversation in the common room lasted 2 hours. We sat side by side in matching armchairs, while the television droned on about nothing, and the other residents shuffled past us like slow, tired ghosts. Nobody paid attention to two old people talking. That was the beauty of being invisible. Nobody thinks you are dangerous when you are 73 and wearing slippers. Walter told me his story first. He had served on the federal bench for 28 years. He had presided over cases involving corporations, cartels, and men in expensive suits who thought they were above the law. He retired at 77, not because he wanted to, but because his wife, Ruth, was diagnosed with lung cancer. He wanted to spend whatever time she had left sitting beside her, not behind a bench. Ruth died 14 months later. Walter sold their house in Buckhead, gave most of the money to a scholarship fund in her name, and checked himself into Magnolia Pines. Not because he was sick, not because he could not take care of himself, but because the silence of an empty house was louder than any courtroom he had ever sat in. "I chose to be here," he said, folding the newspaper neatly on his lap. "Most of these people did not. I see them, Mrs. Hartwell. I see the ones who were put here against their will, warehoused by children who found them inconvenient. I have watched you for 3 days. You do not belong here." "How do you know that?" I asked. He almost smiled. "Because a woman with Alzheimer's does not correct the nurse's grammar when she mispronounces a medication. A woman with Alzheimer's does not calculate the tip on her dining tray to the exact penny and leave it folded under her glass. And a woman with Alzheimer's does not sit in a common room at 6:45 in the morning memorizing the shift change schedule of every orderly on the East Wing." I looked at him. He looked at me. Two old people who had spent their entire lives paying attention to things that other people missed. So I told him everything. I told him about Victoria, about Marcus, about Dr. Nathan Pierce, and his leather folder, and the emergency custody order. I told him about the white van and the garden gate and the way my daughter would not look at me. I told him about the phone call I had overheard, Victoria instructing the nurses to keep me isolated. I told him about the napkin diary tucked inside my pillowcase. I told him things I had not said out loud since Henry died. That Victoria had been pulling away for years. That she was ashamed of me. That she had married into a family that measured people by their bank accounts and found me wanting. That Marcus and his mother, Diana, had looked at me at the wedding like I was a stain on the tablecloth. Walter listened the way a judge listens, completely, without interruption, absorbing every word as evidence. When I finished, the common room was empty. The television had been turned off. The afternoon light was slanting through the dusty windows, and the shadows were long. "In my courtroom," he said, his voice low and precise, "I sentenced men who did far less than what your daughter just did to you. What she has done, Mrs. Hartwell, is not a family disagreement. It is a felony. It is textbook elder abuse. And it is fraud. And in the state of Georgia, it carries a mandatory minimum sentence." The words landed heavy in the silence between us. I had known it was wrong. I had felt it in my bones. But hearing a federal judge call it what it was made it real, in a way that nothing else could. "Do you have a lawyer?" he asked. "A real one. Not the kind who handles parking tickets." I hesitated. This was the moment. The door I had kept locked for 18 years. The secret I had shared with no one. Not Henry, not Victoria, not a living soul except one man in a tall building downtown. "I have James Okafor," I said quietly. "He manages my trust." Walter's eyebrows rose. That was the only visible reaction, but from a man who had spent 3 decades controlling his expressions in a courtroom, it was the equivalent of leaping out of his chair. "A trust," he repeated. "Yes. What kind of trust?" "The kind," I said, "that my daughter does not know exists." Walter looked at me for a long, measured moment. Then he reached into the pocket of his cardigan and pulled out his own cell phone. Unlike me, Walter was a voluntary resident. He had full privileges. He could come and go as he pleased. He had his phone, his books, his Wall Street Journal subscription, and the quiet, lethal authority of a man the system still respected. "May I?" he asked, holding up the phone. I nodded. He dialed. It rang twice. A deep, calm voice answered. "Okafor and Associates. James Okafor speaking." "Mr. Okafor, this is Judge Walter Franklin, retired, Northern District of Georgia. I am calling on behalf of a client of yours, Eleanor Hartwell. She is currently being held at Magnolia Pines Senior, living against her will. Her daughter, a lawyer named Victoria Ashford, has had her committed under a fraudulent psychiatric evaluation. I believe you and I need to have a very serious conversation." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Not the pause of confusion. The pause of a man who has been waiting for exactly this phone call. "Judge Franklin," James said, his voice controlled. "Is Eleanor safe?" "She is sitting right next to me," Walter replied. "She is sharp, coherent, and very angry." Another pause. Then James spoke, and every word landed like a stone dropped into still water. "Tell Mrs. Hartwell that her daughter triggered the gardener's clause 5 months ago. She just does not know it yet." Walter looked at me. I could see the light behind his eyes. The same light I used to see in my brightest students when they solved a problem nobody thought they could. "What is the gardener's clause?" I asked. Walter covered the phone with his hand and smiled. It was the first real smile I had seen since I arrived at Magnolia Pines. And it was not a gentle smile. It was the smile of a man who had just found the winning card. "It means, my dear, that your daughter just pulled up the wrong roots." I lay in my narrow bed that night staring at the ceiling. The parking lot light cast long white bars across the wall. Somewhere down the hall, Mrs. Chen was humming a song I did not recognize. The building was quiet. The world outside my window was dark. But inside me, for the first time in 3 days, something had changed. I did not have my garden. I did not have my home. I did not have my roses or my iron gate or the smell of Savannah earth after rain. But I had something my daughter never counted on. I had a judge who believed me. I had a lawyer who was ready. And I had a clause named after a gardener, waiting in the dark like a seed beneath the soil, ready to crack open everything. Victoria thought she had buried me. She was wrong. She had only planted me. James Okafor arrived at Magnolia Pines on a Thursday afternoon, disguised as a man of God. He wore a simple black shirt with a white clerical collar, carried a leather-bound Bible in one hand and a slim briefcase in the other. He signed in at the front desk as Reverend J. Okafor, pastoral visitor, and the receptionist did not blink. Nobody questions a pastor visiting the elderly. It is one of the last unchallenged kindnesses left in this country. Walter met him in the lobby and led him to the small chapel at the end of the west wing. It was a quiet room with 6 wooden pews, a modest cross on the wall, and a stained-glass window that threw colored light across the floor in the afternoons. It smelled of old hymnals and lemon polish. More importantly, it had a door that locked from the inside. Walter positioned himself outside like a sentry. "If anyone asks," he told James, "I am an old man waiting for my turn to confess. Nobody will disturb us." James sat across from me in the front pew. Up close, he was not what I expected. He was 52, with deep brown skin and steady, careful hands. His accent carried the faint melody of Lagos beneath the crisp diction of an American law degree. His eyes were the kind that missed nothing and gave away less. He was the sort of man who could sit in a courtroom for 8 hours and never once shift in his chair. "Mrs. Hartwell," he said, setting the Bible aside and opening the briefcase, "I want you to know that the moment Judge Franklin called me, I activated every resource I have. My investigators have been working around the clock. But before we discuss what your daughter has done, I need you to understand something. I need you to understand what you have." "I know what I have, James," I said. "I have had it for 18 years. You know the number," he said. "But I am not sure you understand what it means in the context of what is happening to you right now." "May I?" I nodded. He pulled out a thin folder and opened it on the pew between us. The colored light from the stained glass fell across the pages like a blessing or a warning. "In 1995, he began, "you made an investment. $50,000 of personal savings, placed into a private startup called Chen Educational Technologies. The founder was a young man named Thomas Chen." "Tommy," I said. And despite everything, I smiled. "Tommy Chen. He was in my 5th grade class in 1981. Brilliant boy. Came to school every day in the same pair of sneakers, holes in both toes. His mother worked 2 jobs. His father was gone. But that boy could solve problems that made the other teachers scratch their heads." James nodded. "You stayed in contact with him after he graduated." "I did. I wrote him letters. I sent him books. When he got into Georgia Tech, I helped him fill out the financial aid forms. And when he came to me in '95, 26 years old, with a business plan for a company that would make educational software for underfunded schools, I believed him." "You gave him $50,000, James said. "Your entire life savings at the time." "Henry thought I had lost my mind," I said, and the memory ached. "He said we could not afford to gamble with our retirement. I told him it was not a gamble. I told him I knew a good student when I saw one. I told him some seeds just need the right soil." James paused, and for the first time, something close to warmth crossed his professional face. "You were right," he said. Chen Educational Technologies became EduTech Global. They went public in 2010. They are now one of the largest educational technology companies in the world. Their software is used in over 40 countries. Tommy Chen is worth approximately $1.2 billion. And he has never forgotten where he came from. "I know," I said. "He calls me every Christmas. He sends flowers on Henry's birthday." James turned to the next page. "Your initial $50,000 investment, held through the blind trust I established at your request in 2005, has grown considerably. After reinvestment, dividends, and market appreciation, the current total value of the Hartwell Family Education Trust is $28,412,000. The number hung in the chapel air like incense. I had heard it before, in annual reports that James mailed to a post office box. I kept secret from everyone, but hearing it now, in this place, sitting in a locked chapel in a nursing home where my own daughter had imprisoned me. The number felt different. It felt like armor, James continued. When we established the trust in 2005, you made several key decisions. First, you designated yourself as the founder and lifetime beneficiary. Second, you placed the property at 714 Abercorn Street under trust ownership. You are listed on the deed as the trust manager, not the personal owner. The house, the garden, the land, it all belongs to the trust. Not to me, I said. Not to you personally, James confirmed. And critically, not to Victoria. I looked at the stained glass window. A shaft of deep blue light fell across my hands. These were the hands that had planted 47 rose bushes, graded 10,000 papers, and signed a check for $50,000 on faith alone. These were the hands my daughter thought were too old and too feeble to hold anything of value. Why did you do it? James asked gently. He already knew the answer, but I think he needed to hear me say it. Here, in this chapel, with God as my witness. I did it for Victoria, I said. The words came slow and heavy, like stones dropped into a well. When Tommy's company went public, and I saw that first number, I was terrified. Not of the money, of what it would do. I had watched it happen to other families. Inheritance turns children into vultures. It teaches them to wait instead of work. I wanted Victoria to build her own life. I wanted her to earn her own name. I wanted her to be a teacher, or a doctor, or a carpenter like her father. Anything, as long as she built it with her own hands. I paused. The chapel was very quiet, so I hid it, I said. I drove the same car. I wore the same clothes. I lived in the same house Henry and I had always lived in. I never spent a dime of it on myself. I thought I was protecting her. I thought simplicity would teach her the right values. And did it? James asked. I looked at him. My eyes were dry, but something behind them was breaking. She put me in a nursing home, James. She forged a psychiatric evaluation. She is selling my house to pay her husband's debts. I taught her nothing. I just gave her a reason to be ashamed of me. James closed the folder slowly. He placed both hands flat on top of it, as if sealing a verdict. Mrs. Hartwell, he said, what your daughter does not know, what none of them know, is that the house they are trying to sell does not belong to you. It belongs to the trust. And the trust has teeth. He opened a second, thinner folder. The page inside had a single clause highlighted in yellow. Now, he said, I need to tell you what your daughter and her husband have been doing behind your back. And I warn you, Mrs. Hartwell, it is not pleasant. James opened the second folder, and the colored light from the chapel window fell across it like a stain. What came next did not just break my heart. It dismantled it, piece by piece, with surgical precision. 5 months ago, he began, on August the 15th, your daughter Victoria and her husband Marcus Ashford walked into the offices of First National Trust Bank in downtown Savannah. They were accompanied by Dr. Nathan Pierce, the same psychiatrist who signed your emergency custody order. They also brought a private attorney from Marcus's firm. I felt my stomach tighten. What did they want? They wanted you, James said. Or more precisely, they wanted what they believed you controlled. They petitioned the bank to freeze the assets of the Hartwell Family Education Trust. They presented a file. Mrs. Hartwell, a thick, professionally assembled file of what they called evidence. Evidence of what? Your mental decline. James's voice was steady, but I could hear the controlled fury beneath it. They claimed you were exhibiting signs of advanced cognitive deterioration. They cited your simple lifestyle as proof of what they called senile hoarding. They argued that your refusal to spend money, to upgrade your home, to live beyond your means, was a symptom of a mind in collapse. They told the board that you were a danger to yourself and to the estate. I sat very still. The chapel felt smaller. The walls felt closer. They wanted emergency signatory power, James continued. They wanted the bank to grant Victoria full control over all $28 million, effective immediately, bypassing you entirely. They wanted you erased from your own legacy. I closed my eyes. I saw Victoria's face the day she graduated from law school. I had driven 3 hours in the rain to be there. She had hugged me at the ceremony, tight and real, and whispered, "I did it, Mom. I did it for you. That girl, that bright, proud, beautiful girl." She had walked into a bank and told strangers that her mother had lost her mind. "What happened?" I whispered. "The bank rejected them," James said. "The trust manager at First National knows you personally, Mrs. Hartwell. He has met with you annually for 15 years. He knew the claim was fraudulent the moment they made it, and as per the trust security protocol, he called me within the hour." James paused, letting the weight of what came next settle in. "That call, Mrs. Hartwell, that singular act of attempted fraud, triggered the gardener's clause." "Tell me exactly what it says," I said. "I need to hear it." James read from the highlighted page without looking up. "If any primary beneficiary of the Hartwell family education, trust, or any person acting in concert with said beneficiary is found to have engaged in any act of willful, financial, emotional, or physical harm against the founder, Eleanor Hartwell, that beneficiary is immediately, automatically, and permanently disinherited. All rights, claims, and entitlements are irrevocably dissolved, as if the beneficiary had never been named. Permanently." I repeated. "Permanently," James confirmed. "As of August the 15th, Victoria Ashford is no longer the beneficiary of your trust. She has no legal claim to a single dollar. She does not know this yet. But in the eyes of the law, she has already lost everything." The air in the chapel was thick. The stained glass light had shifted. The blue was gone, replaced by a deep amber that made the room feel like it was burning from the inside. "There is more," James said. "Of course there is," I said. "There is always more." He opened a third section of the folder. It was thicker than the others. Financial records, credit card statements, legal filings, medical board notices. "Your son-in-law, Dr. Marcus Ashford," James began, "is not the successful surgeon he presents himself to be. Over the past 3 years, 3 separate patients have filed malpractice lawsuits against him. One case involves a woman who lost partial mobility after a spinal procedure. Another involves a misdiagnosed tumor. The third is sealed, but my investigators believe it involves a wrongful death claim. His total outstanding liability is approximately $2.1 million. His medical license is currently under formal review by the Georgia Composite Medical Board." "My God," I whispered. "His income," James continued, "has dropped significantly. As the hospital has reduced his surgical privileges, he is, in practical terms, a liability masquerading as a physician." "And Victoria?" I asked, though I was not sure I wanted the answer. James slid a single page across the pew. It was a credit card summary. 22 accounts. The balances were staggering. "Your daughter has accumulated approximately $400,000 in unsecured credit card debt. The spending is consistent with compulsive behavior. Nordstrom, Saks Fifth Avenue, online luxury retailers. She has been spending at roughly 3 times her income for the past 2 years." I stared at the numbers. $400,000. My daughter, who had once told me she did not need my help, who had once told me she was doing just fine on her own, was drowning. "But there is one more thing," James said. His voice dropped, and the chapel felt suddenly colder. "This is the part that concerns me most." He turned to the last page. It was a photograph. A restaurant receipt from a hotel in Hilton Head. 2 dinners. A bottle of wine. A room charge. And 2 names on the reservation. Dr. Marcus Ashford and Karen Wells. "Who is Karen Wells?" I asked. "She is a surgical nurse at Marcus's hospital," James said. According to my investigators, they have been in a relationship for approximately 2 years. Victoria does not appear to know. I sat there in the front pew of that tiny chapel, holding a photograph of my son-in-law's betrayal, and I thought about my daughter. Not the woman who had locked me away, not the lawyer who had lied to a bank, but the girl who used to sit on the kitchen floor and watch me roll pie crust, asking me why the edges had to be crimped just so. The girl who fell asleep in my lap every Sunday while I read to her from Charlotte's Web. That girl was buried under $400,000 of debt. A cheating husband, a corrupt doctor, and a mother-in-law who had taught her that appearances were more important than truth. "She is still my daughter, James," I said. My voice cracked for the first time since they had taken me from my garden. James looked at me. His professional mask softened. Just slightly. "She was your beneficiary, Mrs. Hartwell," he said gently. "As of 5 months ago, she is not." The distinction was clear. The law had already made its judgment. Victoria had disqualified herself. The gardener's clause had done its work silently, like frost-killing roots beneath the soil. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand. The napkin diary in my pillowcase. The hidden phone in my nightstand. The judge outside the door. The lawyer sitting across from me. The $28 million that my daughter did not know existed. All of it had been waiting. All of it had been patient. "So what do we do now?" I asked. James closed every folder. He stacked them neatly, precisely, the way a man stacks ammunition before a battle. Then he looked at me, and for the first time, there was fire in those careful eyes. "Now, Mrs. Hartwell, we set the trap, and your daughter, the lawyer, is going to sign her own conviction." I had spent 35 years teaching children how to read. I had taught them to sound out words they had never seen, to find meaning in sentences that confused them, to trust that the story would make sense if they just kept going. Now, I was about to teach my own daughter the most painful lesson of her life. And unlike my classroom, there would be no second chances. James laid out the plan in the chapel that Thursday afternoon with the precision of a surgeon and the patience of a chess master. Walter sat beside me, his sharp old eyes tracking every word. "The document," James explained, "will be called a care and property transfer agreement. It will look exactly like what Victoria wants to see. A legal surrender. A white flag. It will state that you, Eleanor Hartwell, in your diminished and vulnerable state, agree to transfer the full deed and title of the property at 714 Abercorn Street to your daughter, Victoria Ashford. In exchange, Victoria and Marcus agree to assume full responsibility for your lifetime care, including housing, medical supervision, and all financial management." "It sounds like I am giving up," I said. "That is precisely the point," James replied. "Victoria is a lawyer. She will recognize the structure. She will see what she expects to see. And because she is desperate, because she needs this house to pay debts she cannot cover, she will not read the fine print." "What is in the fine print?" I asked. James allowed himself the smallest of smiles. "The fine print, Mrs. Hartwell, is a masterpiece. By signing, Victoria, Marcus, and any witnesses will formally and legally attest that you are suffering from diminished mental capacity and are unable to make your own decisions. They will confirm in writing that they are assuming control of your affairs based on their personal observation of your incompetence." Walter leaned forward. "It is not a transfer, Ellie. It is a confession. A signed, witnessed, notarized confession of conspiracy and elder abuse." I let the elegance of it settle over me. My daughter, the lawyer, was going to be undone by her own expertise. She would look at this document and see a standard agreement because she wanted to see one. Her greed would blind her to the trap buried in the clauses. It was, as Walter said, diabolical and perfectly legal. But before any of that could happen, I had to make the call. I had to become the woman Victoria believed I was. Weak, confused, broken. Walter coached me that evening in his room. He sat across from me in his reading chair, a cup of cold tea forgotten on the nightstand, and he directed me like an old theater conductor. "Make your voice tremble," he said. "Not too much. She knows you. If you overplay it, she will suspect. Let her hear the exhaustion. Let her hear the surrender. Cry if you can, but do not sob. A sob is dramatic. A quiet, tired sniffle is devastating." I closed my eyes and thought of my garden. I thought of the roses Henry planted. I thought of the iron gate with the scrollwork E. I thought of the morning they came for me. The smell of the earth. The mockingbird in the magnolia tree. And then I thought of something I had not allowed myself to remember in days. Victoria, at 6 years old, standing in the garden in a yellow sundress, holding a watering can that was almost as big as she was. She was trying to water the roses the way I did, gently at the base, not on the leaves. She was concentrating so hard that her tongue stuck out from the corner of her mouth. She looked up at me and said, "Mama, why do you love the roses so much?" And I told her, "Because they take a long time to grow, baby. And the things that take the longest to grow are always the most beautiful." The memory hit me like a wave. My throat tightened. My eyes burned. I did not have to pretend. Walter handed me the phone. I dialed Victoria's number. She answered on the second ring. "Mom?" Her voice was cautious, clipped. "Is everything all right?" I let out a long, shaky breath. "Victoria. Honey." I let my voice crack naturally. Because it was cracking. I was not acting. I was mourning. "Mom, what is wrong? Are you okay? Your mother and I. We have been talking," I said, knowing she would assume I meant a counselor or a nurse. "I have had a long few nights, Victoria, and I think maybe you were right." Silence. I could hear her breathing quicken. I could almost feel her leaning forward, not daring to hope. "Right about what, Mom?" "The house." I let the word fall like a stone. "It is too much. I cannot fight anymore. I want to sign it over to you. Officially. I just want this to be over." The silence on the other end lasted 3 full seconds. When Victoria spoke again, her voice was different. The caution was gone, replaced by something bright and hungry and relieved. "Oh, Mom." She breathed it out like a prayer. "Oh, Mom, yes. You are doing the right thing. I promise you. We will take care of everything. You will not have to worry about a single thing ever again. Not a single question about my health. Not one word about whether I was eating. Not a syllable of concern for the woman who had raised her. Just relief. Pure, undiluted, greedy relief. It made me sick. "Good," I said, steadying my voice. "I need you to come to a lawyer's office tomorrow. James Okafor, at the Savannah Bank Tower. 2 o'clock. Bring Marcus. Bring Diana. I want everyone present so it is all official and legal." "Absolutely, Mom. We will all be there. 2 o'clock. Do not worry about a thing." "I know you will take care of everything, Victoria," I said. "I know you will." I hung up. My hand was trembling, but not from the performance. It was the grief. It was the sound of my daughter's joy at the thought of taking everything I had. Walter was watching me from across the room. His old eyes were soft. "That was extraordinary, Ellie," he said quietly. I shook my head. "It was not a performance, Walter. That was a mother saying goodbye to the daughter she thought she raised." We sat in silence for a long moment. Then Walter's phone rang. He answered, listened, and nodded. "That was James," he said. "Rosa Delgado just landed at Savannah Airport." Rosa. The name filled the room like sunlight through a window. I had not seen her in 8 months, but I had spoken to her last Sunday, as I did every Sunday. She had told me about her third graders, about the boy who finally learned to read, about the lesson plan she was building around Charlotte's Web. the same book I used to read to Victoria. I lay on my narrow bed that last night at Magnolia Pines and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow, my daughter would walk into a conference room believing she had won. She would sit down at a mahogany table, pick up an expensive pen, and sign a document she would not bother to read. And in doing so, she would hand me everything I needed to teach her the lesson I had failed to teach her in 41 years. That every action has a consequence. That every garden has a gate. And that some gates, once closed, do not open again. At precisely 2 o'clock the following afternoon, the heavy glass doors of the main conference room on the 38th floor of the Savannah Bank Tower swung open, and my daughter walked in like a queen, arriving at her coronation. Victoria wore a white blazer over a cream silk blouse. It was the outfit she reserved for courtroom victories. I had seen photographs of her wearing it on her firm's website. Standing in front of a courthouse, arms crossed, chin lifted, the picture of professional triumph. She had chosen it deliberately. This was, in her mind, the closing argument of the most important case of her life. Marcus followed a half-step behind her, wearing a navy blue suit that fit too well for a man $2.1 million in debt. His smile was wide, practiced. The kind of smile that made patients trust him before he ruined their spines. He carried himself with the easy confidence of a man who believed the world existed to serve him. And behind them both, Diana Ashford made her entrance. She wore gold earrings, a gold necklace, gold bracelets layered up both wrists. Her hair was set in a perfect silver bob, and her lips were painted the exact shade of Savannah brick. She looked like a monument to herself. She surveyed the conference room the way a real estate agent surveys a property, already calculating what it was worth and how much of it belonged to her. James Okafor stood at the far end of the mahogany table, immaculate in a charcoal gray suit. His face was professional, warm, accommodating. He was, in that moment, the most dangerous man in the building, and he looked like the friendliest. I sat at the opposite end of the table, small and quiet. I wore the same cardigan I had been wearing at Magnolia Pines. My hair was not styled. My hands were folded in my lap. I had no jewelry, no makeup, no armor. I looked exactly the way Victoria expected me to look. Old. Tired. Defeated. "Mom," Victoria said, walking over and placing her hand on my shoulder. Her touch was heavy, proprietary, the touch of someone claiming an object, not comforting a person. "You look so tired. Do not worry. From now on, we handle everything." "Poor dear," Diana added, settling into a chair as if she owned it. She patted my hand with her cold, ring-laden fingers. "It really is for the best, Eleanor. People your age need structure. You will be so much more comfortable at Magnolia Pines with people your own age." I said nothing. I kept my hands folded. I kept my eyes down. "Let us get this done," Marcus announced, pulling out the chair at the head of the table, the one directly across from James. He sat down as though he were chairing a board meeting. "We have dinner reservations at 7. The River House. To celebrate." James gestured for everyone to be seated. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," he said, his voice the perfect blend of professionalism and deference. As Mrs. Hartwell expressed to her daughter, "She and I have had a series of discussions, and she has come to a significant decision regarding the property." He slid 4 thick, professionally bound documents across the polished mahogany table. One to Victoria, one to Marcus, one to Diana, one to me. "This," James said, "is the care and property transfer agreement. It is a comprehensive document. Allow me to summarize the key points." Victoria's eyes were already locked on the cover page. Her fingers twitched toward the pen in the center of the table. She was vibrating with impatience, a racehorse at the gate. "The agreement states," James continued in a calm, measured, legal monotone, "that Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell, the founder, agrees to transfer the full deed and title of the property at 714 Abercorn Street to Mrs. Victoria Ashford. In exchange, Mrs. Ashford and Dr. Marcus Ashford agree to provide comprehensive lifetime care for the founder, including housing, medical supervision, and all financial management. Yes, Victoria said, reaching for the pen. Absolutely. 100%. Where do I sign? James raised a hand. Patience, Mrs. Ashford. We must do this by the book. There are several signature pages. He turned to Diana. And since you, Mrs. Ashford Sr., are present today as a family member and witness, we would be grateful if you would sign the attestation on page 8. It simply verifies that you are present, that you are party to this agreement, and that you can confirm the founder's current state of mind. Diana's eyes brightened. She sat up straighter, as though she had been handed a microphone at a charity gala. Of course, she said, her voice rich with theatrical concern. We have been saying for months that Eleanor needs supervision. I am happy to attest to that. It is so important that these things are documented properly. Wonderful, James said. Then please, let us begin. He passed the first copy to Victoria. She did not open it. She did not flip through the pages. She did not skim the clauses or check the fine print. She was a lawyer, a woman trained to read every word of every document she ever touched. And she turned directly to the final page and signed her name with a flourish so aggressive it nearly tore the paper. Marcus followed. His signature was faster, messier, the scrawl of a man who signs prescriptions and consent forms all day without thinking. He did not even uncap the pen properly. Diana signed page 8 with the practiced elegance of a woman who believed her signature was an autograph. She dotted the I in Ashford with a tiny, precise circle. None of them read a single word. James slid the final copy to me. I looked at it. I looked at the pen. I looked at my daughter, who was already pulling out her phone to text someone. I picked up the pen. My hand was steady. I signed my name. James gathered all 4 copies and stacked them neatly. He tapped them once against the table, aligning the edges with a quiet, final precision. Well, he said, that seems to be everything. Victoria stood up. She clapped her hands together once, a single sharp sound that echoed off the glass walls. Perfect. Marcus, call the contractor first thing tomorrow morning. I want the garden ripped out by the end of the week. We are putting in a pool. She turned to me. Mom, we will help you pack. Magnolia Pines has a lovely permanent care wing. You will be very comfortable there. They have activities and everything. Bingo, I think. The garden ripped out. A pool. Bingo. I felt the anger rise like heat from pavement. Not the shaking, shouting kind. The still kind. The kind that sits at the bottom of your chest and waits. I let the silence hang for exactly 10 seconds. I counted them. 1 for every year I had spent hiding my wealth to protect a daughter who would sell my roses for a swimming pool. Then I looked at James. He met my eyes and gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. Actually, I said, and my voice was clear and strong, cutting through Victoria's happy chatter like a blade through silk. We are not quite finished yet. Victoria's smile froze. The phone was still in her hand. The contractor's number was still on the screen. What? She said. What do you mean? We signed everything. You did, I agreed. But there is one small problem with the property you just signed for. A minor detail, really. Diana's gold bracelets clinked as she set down her purse. What detail? I leaned forward. The house, I said. I do not actually own it. The silence that followed those 5 words was the most satisfying silence I had ever heard in my 73 years on this earth. It outlasted the surprise in Victoria's face, the confusion in Marcus's eyes, and the first flicker of alarm in Diana's perfectly painted expression. Then James spoke, and his voice had changed. The warm, accommodating tone was gone. The professional courtesy was gone. What replaced it was something precise and cold and absolute. the voice of a man who had spent a lifetime building iron-tight cases and was now delivering the closing argument. Technically speaking, Mrs. Ashford, James said, turning to Victoria with a calm that bordered on surgical. The property at 714 Abercorn Street does not belong to your mother personally. Her name appears on the county deed, but she is listed only in her capacity as trust manager. The legal and indisputable owner of that property, and has been for the past 18 years, is the Hartwell Family Education Trust. Victoria stared at him. What? Her voice was flat, stripped of everything, like a chord played on a broken instrument. What trust? Marcus set down his phone. His celebratory posture collapsed by about 2 inches. Diana's bracelets clinked as she gripped the armrest of her chair. I watched all 3 of them from my end of the table. I kept my face still. I had learned long ago that the most powerful thing a teacher can do in the moment of revelation is stay quiet and let the lesson land. I do not understand, Victoria said. She looked at me, then back at James, then at me again. Mom, what is he talking about? What trust? You never mentioned any trust. No. I agreed. I never did, James continued, his voice unhurried, each word placed like a stone in a wall. The Hartwell Family Education Trust was established in 2005. It is a blind trust, managed through my office, funded by the proceeds of a private investment your mother made 10 years prior. Victoria pressed both hands flat on the mahogany table. She was leaning forward now, her lawyer's mind working visibly behind her eyes, parsing the words, looking for the loophole. What investment? In 1995, I said. I invested $50,000 into a small technology startup. It was founded by a former student of mine. His name is Thomas Chen. I watched the name land. It meant nothing to Victoria. She had never cared about my students. She had never asked about the children I tutored, the ones I mentored, the ones I wrote letters of recommendation for every spring. They were, to her, the furniture of my life. Background, irrelevant. Thomas Chen's company, James continued, is now publicly traded under the name EduTech Global. They are one of the largest educational technology platforms in the world, operating in 43 countries. Your mother's initial investment, held and reinvested through the trust over 28 years, has grown considerably. He opened the folder he had kept to the side throughout the signing ceremony. He placed it flat on the table in front of him and read from the top page. As of this morning's market open, the current total valuation of the Hartwell Family Education Trust's liquid and fixed assets is $28,412,000. The number entered the room the way a stone enters still water. It did not splash. It simply dropped, and the ripples moved outward in every direction. I watched the silence. I watched Marcus, who had gone the color of old concrete. His mouth opened, then closed. His eyes moved to me, then to James, then to the folder, then back to me, like a man watching a fire and not understanding yet that he was standing inside it. I watched Diana, whose gold bracelets had gone completely still, as if even her jewelry had stopped breathing. And I watched my daughter. Victoria's face went through several expressions in the span of about 4 seconds. Confusion first, the genuine blankness of a mind encountering information it cannot process. Then disbelief, the hard, squinting look of someone reading a number twice because it cannot be right. Then something cracked open behind her eyes. Something bright and sudden and ravenous. 28 million, she whispered. She said it the way people say it in dreams. Slowly, reverently, as if the number were fragile and might disappear if she spoke it too quickly. Then she turned to Marcus, and her face transformed entirely. All the months of fear and debt and performance and pretending, all of it dissolved in one incandescent moment of pure, unguarded joy. Her eyes filled with tears. The real kind. I had not seen her cry real tears since Henry's funeral. "Baby," she said, grabbing Marcus by the arm, her voice climbing, cracking. "Baby, we are rich. Oh my God, we are rich." She laughed. A high, breathless sound, half joy and half sob. "Who cares about the stupid house? We get the trust. All of it." She turned to me, and I saw her face change again. The coldness and the calculation dissolving into something that looked almost like love. The frantic, desperate kind that arrives too late. "Mom." She said it like an apology and a celebration at the same time. "Oh, Mom, I always knew you were special. I always told Marcus, your mother is so remarkable, so wise, so dignified. I knew there was something more to you. I always felt it." She reached across the table toward my hand. Her eyes were shining. "Stop," I said. It was one word. Quiet, flat, final. Victoria stopped mid-reach. Her smile faltered the way a candle falters in a sudden draft. "You are not rich," I said. I looked at her steadily, the way I used to look at a student who had given me the wrong answer with absolute confidence. "Neither of you is rich, and you do not get a single penny of that trust." The joy drained from Victoria's face like water from a cracked glass. Slowly, and then all at once. "What?" she said. "What do you mean?" "I am the beneficiary. I am your only child. I am the beneficiary." "You were the beneficiary," I said. Past tense. "You were." Victoria turned to James, her lawyer's instincts finally awakening after being drowned in greed for the past 10 minutes. "James," she said, her voice sharpening. "What is she talking about?" "What does that mean?" James folded his hands on top of the folder. He looked at Victoria, the way a judge looks at a defendant who has just realized the verdict was never going to go their way. "It means," he said, "that we need to discuss something called the gardener's clause." Victoria had built her entire career on language. She knew what words meant. She knew the weight of a clause, the architecture of a contract, the difference between a comma placed correctly and one placed carelessly that could unravel an entire agreement. She was, by every professional measure, a woman who understood documents, which made what happened next all the more devastating. James opened the folder he had kept to the side throughout the entire meeting. He removed a single page and placed it in the center of the table, face up, where everyone could see it. "The gardener's clause," he said, "is a provision I drafted at your mother's request when we established the Hartwell Family Education Trust in 2005. It is named, as your mother suggested, for the work she loves most." It reads as follows. He did not read from the page. He had memorized it, the way a judge memorizes a sentence before delivering it. "If any primary beneficiary of the Hartwell Family Education Trust, or any person acting in concert with said beneficiary, is found to have engaged in any act of willful financial, emotional, or physical harm against the founder, Eleanor Hartwell, that beneficiary is immediately, automatically, and permanently disinherited. All rights, claims, and entitlements shall be irrevocably dissolved, effective from the date of the first qualifying harmful act, as if the beneficiary had never been named in the trust at all." Victoria stared at the page. I watched her read it. I watched her read it again. I could almost hear the sound of her legal mind engaging, turning the language over, looking for the exit. "Permanently," she said. Her voice was very quiet. "Irrevocably," James confirmed. "But I have not done anything," she said. Her voice was rising. She turned to me. "Mom, I was trying to help you. I was worried. We were all worried. The house was too much. You were alone. We wanted to make sure you were safe." I had heard that word so many times over the past few days. Safe. They wanted me safe, the way a coin wants to be in a vault, behind a lock, Inaccessible. Out of circulation. Victoria, I said. August the 15th. The color left her face so quickly I thought she might faint. What? She whispered. James continued speaking, his voice level and precise. On August the 15th of this year, you and your husband Marcus Ashford, accompanied by Dr. Nathan Pierce and an attorney from your husband's firm, attended a private meeting at First National Trust Bank. You presented a file of medical and behavioral documentation to the bank's trust committee. You petitioned the committee to freeze all assets of the Hartwell Family Education Trust and grant you emergency signatory power, citing your belief that the founder, Eleanor Hartwell, was no longer of sound mind and was therefore a danger to her own estate. I was not there, Victoria said. The words came out fast, reflexive, the instinct of a person who has spent years in courtrooms. I do not know what you are talking about. The bank has security footage, James said calmly. The trust manager's testimony is already on record, and your signature, along with Marcus's and Dr. Pierce's, appears on the formal petition submitted to the committee. Victoria looked at Marcus. Marcus was staring at the table. That was a private inquiry, Victoria said. It was estate planning. We were just exploring options. We were trying to protect her assets. You were trying to steal them, I said. I had not raised my voice. I never raised my voice. 35 years in a classroom had taught me that the quietest statement is always the loudest. Victoria flinched. It was the first honest reaction I had seen from her since she walked through the door. The trust manager rejected the petition, James said, and immediately contacted my office, as per the security protocol written into the trust bylaws. That phone call arrived on August the 15th at 11:23 in the morning. I activated the gardener's clause that afternoon. Your daughter disqualified herself, Mrs. Hartwell, 5 months before she ever set foot in this room. Victoria put both hands over her mouth. Above them, her eyes were enormous. And yesterday, James added, turning to indicate the stack of signed documents on the table, when you placed your mother in Magnolia Pines using a fraudulent psychiatric evaluation, and when you arrived here today to sign a property transfer based on a declared belief in her incapacity, you confirmed and compounded that disqualification beyond any legal doubt. This is a trap, Victoria said. Her voice cracked on the last word. She lowered her hands. Her face had gone from pale to blotched, red patches rising along her jawline and cheekbones. This is entrapment. I am a lawyer. I know my rights. James picked up the stack of documents they had all signed. He held them up, and the afternoon light caught the notary seal on the front page. You are a lawyer, he said, who did not read the document she signed. That is not entrapment, Mrs. Ashford. That is negligence, or, in your particular case, arrogance. The words hit her like open palms. She actually stepped back from the table. What is in there? She demanded, pointing at the documents. What did I sign? You signed, James said, placing the stack back on the table with a quiet, definitive sound, a legally binding, notarized attestation that you personally believe your mother is suffering from diminished mental capacity and is incapable of managing her own affairs. You signed a statement confirming that you and your husband have conspired to assume control of her property on the basis of that belief. And Diana, he said, turning to the woman at the end of the table, who had gone completely still, by signing the witness page, you have formally confirmed and supported those claims. Diana's bracelet sounded like a tiny, broken bell. You told me it was a standard attestation, she said, pointing at Victoria. You told me I was just confirming I was present. That is what it appeared to be. James agreed. What it actually is a confession. This is my mother, Victoria said, and now her voice had climbed into something ragged and desperate. You cannot use a family disagreement as a criminal matter. I looked at my daughter. I looked at the woman she had become. The white blazer. The courtroom posture. The practiced argument. All of it crumbling at the edges, the way a beautiful wall crumbles when water gets into the cracks. You did not come here for a family disagreement, Victoria, I said. You came here to take my home. You came here to finish what you started in that bank 5 months ago. And you brought your mother-in-law as a witness to your own confession." Victoria opened her mouth. She closed it. She looked at Marcus. "And Marcus," James said, his voice dropping just slightly, "we have not yet discussed your part in all of this." He reached beneath the table and placed a second folder on the mahogany surface. Flat. Deliberate. Patient. "Perhaps," he said, "we should start with Karen Wells." Marcus had been very still for the past several minutes. That was the thing I had noticed about him from the very beginning. The first time Victoria brought him to my house for dinner, 7 years ago. He was a man who went still when threatened. Not calm. Still. The way a lizard goes still on a hot rock, not because it is relaxed, but because it is calculating the distance to the nearest shadow. That stillness shattered the moment James said her name. "Karen Wells is a surgical nurse at Mercy General Hospital," James said, opening the second folder with the unhurried precision of a man who has done this before, in better rooms than this one. "She has worked in your department, Dr. Ashford, for 6 years. According to my investigators, she and your husband have maintained a personal relationship outside of the hospital for approximately 2 years. James reached beneath the table and pressed a small remote control. The large presentation screen mounted on the wall at the far end of the conference room hummed to life. It displayed a series of documents, restaurant receipts, hotel folios, a photograph taken at a distance outside a restaurant in Hilton Head, a man and a woman at a corner table, their heads close together. Marcus's profile was unmistakable. Victoria looked at the screen. She looked at Marcus. She looked at the screen again. "Karen," she said. Her voice was a single flat note, like a piano key struck without any feeling behind it. "Karen Wells. The Karen who came to our Christmas party last year, the one who told me she loved my house, the one who hugged me at the door and said I was so lucky." Marcus said nothing. He had his hands flat on the table. Very still. Very quiet. Staring at a point somewhere between the folder and the horizon. "She was in our home," Victoria said. Her voice was beginning to climb. "She sat at our dinner table." James clicked to the next slide without comment. Medical board filings. Case numbers. Settlement summaries. Over the past 3 years, he continued. Dr. Ashford has been named in 3 separate medical malpractice lawsuits. The first involves a patient who sustained permanent partial paralysis following a spinal fusion procedure performed in 2021. The second involves a misdiagnosis that resulted in delayed cancer treatment. The third is currently under a partial seal, but my office has obtained a summary indicating it involves a wrongful death claim. He paused. His total outstanding liability across these 3 matters is approximately $2.1 million. His surgical privileges at Mercy General have been formally restricted pending the outcome of the board's investigation. His medical license is under active review. Victoria was gripping the edge of the table with both hands. The white blazer was no longer triumphant. It was just white. Just cloth. Just another expensive thing bought on a credit card that had no room left on it. "You told me the lawsuit was one case," she said to Marcus. "One bad outcome. You told me it was frivolous, and your insurance would handle it." Marcus said nothing. "You told me we were fine," she said. Her voice cracked on the last word like old porcelain dropped on a tile floor. James clicked the remote a 3rd time. The screen changed again. A long column of credit card accounts. Victoria's. The balances were staggering. "Your combined financial picture," James said, "is as follows. Dr. Ashford's malpractice liability stands at $2.1 million. Mrs. Ashford's personal credit card debt totals approximately $400,000. Together, you have been living at roughly double your combined income for the past 2 years, sustained entirely by debt instruments that are now past their limits." He let that sit for a moment, then added, as a point of context, that in attempting to access this trust, you were not, as you claimed, trying to protect your mother. You were trying to save yourselves. Victoria turned to Marcus. All the composure was gone now. Her face was open in a way I had not seen since she was a child. "How much did you know?" she asked him. Her voice was low. "How much of this did you know when you told me this plan would work?" Marcus finally looked at her. His face, beneath the expensive grooming and the professional polish, was the face of a man who had run out of road. Before Marcus could answer, Diana's chair scraped back from the table. She stood up abruptly, her gold jewelry catching the light one last time. "This is preposterous," she said. Her voice had the edge of a woman who had spent decades making other people feel small and was now using that edge as a shield. "This is an absolute farce. We came here in good faith, as a family, to help this woman. And instead we are subjected to this witch hunt, this invasion, this—" "Miss Higgins," James said. The room went silent, as if a hand had pressed down on it. Diana froze. "Excuse me?" she said. James looked at her with the same level, patient expression he had maintained throughout the entire meeting. "Your birth name," he said, "is Donna Mae Higgins. You were born in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, in 1957. You graduated from Tuscaloosa High School in 1975. You married Gerald Ashford in 1981, after telling him and his family that you were the daughter of a Savannah banking family named Beaumont. There is no such banking family. The name Beaumont does not appear in any Savannah property or business record prior to your marriage." Diana opened her mouth. James continued. "You have maintained this identity for 43 years. Your husband, Gerald Ashford, divorced you in 2003. He is currently living in Charleston, and when my investigator contacted him last week, he confirmed every detail of this account without hesitation." The gold bracelets clinked against the table as Diana grabbed it for support. "Diana," Victoria said, turning to look at her mother-in-law with an expression I recognized. It was the same expression I must have worn when they came for me in the garden. Pure, unguarded disbelief at the person who was supposed to be solid ground. "I did what I had to do," Diana said. Her voice was different now, smaller. The Southern belle cadence was slipping, and beneath it, something flatter and harder and more Alabaman was beginning to show. "I built a life. I gave Marcus a good name. I gave him everything." "You gave him a lie," Marcus said. He said it quietly, with the hollow tone of a man who has just realized that the foundation he built everything on was made of sand. "You told me we had something. You told me our name meant something. Your name," James said, "means exactly what any name means. What the person carrying it has earned." And that, I thought, watching the three of them begin to turn on each other across the ruins of their beautiful, fraudulent afternoon, was the truest thing anyone had said in this room all day. The implosion was quiet at first. A question from Victoria, a deflection from Marcus, a wounded declaration from Diana. Then, louder, names and accusations ricocheting off the glass walls like small, ugly stones. I sat at my end of the table and watched, my hands folded, my face still. I had taught children for 35 years. I had seen every variety of classroom chaos, every permutation of blame and denial and deflection. I had learned that the wisest thing a teacher could do, in the moment when everything came apart, was simply to wait. I waited. And then, from the side door, the one that led to James's private office, came the sound of a quiet knock. James pressed a small button on the intercom panel. "You may come in now," he said. The side door opened, and the room changed. There was no dramatic entrance, no sharp heels, no expensive perfume, no jewelry catching the light. The woman who walked in wore simple navy slacks and a cream blouse, ironed but not expensively so. Her hair was pulled back in a low bun. Her hands were empty. She was 28 years old, small, framed, with deep brown eyes that were warm, the way early morning light through old curtains is warm. Gentle, steady, entirely without performance. I had not seen Rosa Delgado in 8 months, but I had spoken to her last Sunday, as I did every Sunday, as I had done every Sunday for 12 years. She always called at 9 in the morning, and she always asked the same first question. Not how are you? Not what have you been up to? How is the garden, Mrs. Hartwell? She walked to my end of the table and placed one hand gently on my shoulder. She looked at the 3 people across from us with an expression I recognized. I had worn it myself many times, standing at the front of a classroom, looking at a child who had done something wrong and was about to be held accountable. It was not anger. It was a clear-eyed, unflinching sorrow that was somehow worse. Who is she? Victoria demanded. Her voice had been stripped raw by the past hour. This is a private family meeting. This is Miss Rosa Delgado, James said. She is a 3rd-grade teacher at Franklin Elementary in Macon, Georgia. She is also the contingent beneficiary of the Hartwell Family Education Trust. The room absorbed that sentence like dry earth absorbs the first rain, slowly. And then all at once. The what? Victoria whispered. Upon the legal and permanent disqualification of the primary beneficiary, James continued, as occurred on August the 15th, all assets and titles transfer automatically to the contingent beneficiary. As of 9 o'clock this morning, Miss Delgado is the sole heir to the entire trust. All $28 million, including the property at 714 Abercorn Street. Victoria stared. A teacher. You are giving everything to a teacher. I found Rosa when she was 8 years old, I said. I did not look at James. I looked at Rosa. And I told my daughter the truth she had never bothered to ask for. She was in my 2nd-year class at Savannah Elementary. Her father had already left. Her mother worked 2 jobs. Rosa came to school every day in clothes that were clean, but too small. She could not read a single word at 8 years old. She had slipped through every crack in every system that was supposed to catch her. I kept her after school 3 days a week for the entire year. We sat on the floor of my classroom with her shoes off and a glass of milk I paid for myself, because she told me once, very quietly, that she was hungry. By June, she was reading chapter books. By middle school, she was ahead of grade level. I paid for her school supplies every year until she graduated. I wrote her college recommendation. When she got into the University of Georgia, she called me from a payphone and cried for 20 minutes. She said, I want to be a teacher, Mrs. Hartwell. Just like you. I paused. She calls me every Sunday to tell me about her class. She was here 2 years ago when I had knee surgery, sitting in a hospital chair for 2 days with a coat over her shoulders because I mentioned the recovery ward was lonely. She never asked for a single thing in return. I looked at Victoria. You are my daughter, I said, and she is my family. There is a difference, Victoria, and you taught it to me yourself. Victoria stood up. Her composure was in pieces, but she was trying to collect them, trying to arrange her face back into the shape of a woman who controlled the outcome of rooms. I am your blood, she said. You cannot choose a stranger over your own child. I already did, I said. And I did not choose her over you. You chose this. You made your choice the moment you walked into that bank. I made mine long before that. Rosa reached into the folder she carried and placed a document on the table directly in front of Victoria. It landed with a quiet, final sound. As legal administrator of the trust, Rosa said, her voice steady and without cruelty. I am notifying you that you have 48 hours to vacate the property at 714 Abercorn Street. Personal belongings may be removed. Anything remaining after 2 o'clock Thursday will be treated as abandoned. The locks will be changed at 2:01. Victoria looked at Marcus. She was still looking for something to hold on to. Marcus, she said, tell them. We will fight this. Marcus said nothing. He stood up. He straightened his jacket with a small habitual gesture, picked up his phone, and walked to the far door, without looking at anyone. Not at James. Not at Rosa. Not at me. Not at his wife. The door swung shut behind him with the sound of a period at the end of a sentence. "Marcus," Victoria said. Her voice was barely a breath. The door did not open again. Diana gathered her gold bracelets and her 43 years of invented identity and followed her son without a word. And then the room was quiet. Victoria stood alone in her white blazer at the far end of the mahogany table. She looked at the eviction notice. She looked at the door Marcus had walked through. She looked at me. "Everyone is gone, Mom," she whispered. I looked at my daughter. At the wreckage of the afternoon. At everything she had lost. And everything she had built it from. "Not everyone," I said. "I am still here." Victoria did not move for a long time. She stood at the far end of the mahogany table in her white blazer, in the silence that Marcus and Diana had left behind, and she stared at the eviction notice Rosa had placed in front of her. She stared at it the way a person stares at a fire that has already consumed everything, not searching for something to save, just watching the last of it burn. Then her legs gave way and she sat down. Not deliberately, not gracefully. She simply sat, the way people sit when the body makes the decision before the mind does. She pressed both hands flat on the table and stared at the grain of the wood. James cleared his throat. He picked up the yellow legal pad from beside him and set it on the table with the quiet authority of a man who has not yet finished. "Mrs. Ashford," he said, "before this meeting concludes, there are several matters we need to address." Victoria looked up. Her mascara had tracked 2 pale gray lines down her cheekbones. She had not cried. They were not tears. They were simply the evidence of a face that had been under too much pressure for too long. "What matters?" she asked. Her voice was flat. "Spent." James uncapped his pen. "The documents you and your family signed today, combined with the bank records, the testimony of the trust manager at First National, the medical board filings, and the security footage from August the 15th, constitute a substantial body of evidence. Evidence that my office is legally obligated to present to the relevant authorities unless certain conditions are met." Victoria's eyes sharpened. "Attorney again." "Not daughter." "Attorney." "What authorities?" she said. "What charges?" James wrote on the legal pad as he spoke. "The first charge. Conspiracy to commit felony elder fraud. You, your husband, and your mother-in-law conspired to deprive a vulnerable adult of her legal property through fraudulent claims of mental incapacity." He held up the stack of documents. "A charge to which you have all provided, written, notarized, witnessed confirmation." Victoria said nothing. "The second charge," James continued. "Attempted bank fraud. A federal offense. On August the 15th, you personally participated in a fraudulent petition to a federally insured financial institution, making materially false statements about your mother's cognitive state in order to obtain unauthorized access to her assets. The bank's security footage documents your presence. The trust manager's sworn statement confirms the content of your representations." He wrote again. "The third charge. Conspiracy to commit medical fraud. Dr. Nathan Pierce accepted $30,000 in compensation from your husband to produce a fraudulent psychiatric evaluation. You knew about and benefited from that evaluation. That makes you a party to the fraud." He paused. The room was very quiet. "And the fourth charge," James said, his voice dropping by just 1 register. "Felony elder abuse. You intentionally and systematically inflicted profound emotional and psychological harm on Eleanor Hartwell, a person over the age of 65, for the explicit purpose of financial gain. In the state of Georgia, that charge carries a mandatory minimum sentence." He set the pen down. "I am talking about prison, Mrs. Ashford." The word landed like something physical. Victoria's body absorbed it the way a body absorbs a blow, a slight rearward movement, a compression of the chest, a momentary stillness before the system processes what just happened. "Prison," she repeated. Her voice was barely audible. "Men who exploit their parents," James said, "do not fare well before Georgia juries." Lawyers who exploit their parents fare considerably worse. Victoria pushed back from the table. She stood up. Then she did something I had not seen her do since she was 11 years old, and had broken my favorite ceramic bowl, the blue one with the white flowers that Henry had brought back from a work trip. She walked around the end of the table, and she dropped to her knees in front of me. She took my hands in both of hers. Her hands were cold and trembling. "Mom," she said, "please." Her voice was the voice of the little girl in the yellow sundress, the one with her tongue stuck out, concentrating on the watering can. "Please, do not do this. I know what I did was wrong. I know it. But it was Marcus. It was Diana. They came to me when we were desperate, when we had nothing left, and they told me it would work, that it was the only way. I was terrified, Mom. I was drowning and I could not see anything else. I looked down at her, at the crown of my daughter's head, at her hands around mine, cold as river water in January. 'You love me,' I said." The words tasted like something old and difficult. "Yes," she whispered. "I have always loved you. You love me," I repeated, and my voice did not shake, though everything behind it did. "And so you sat in a bank and told a board of strangers that your mother had lost her mind. You love me. And so you had me carried out of my garden in my slippers without letting me say goodbye to a single rose. You love me. And so you put me in a room with a view of a parking lot and told the nurses not to let me call anyone." I looked at her steadily. "Is that what love looks like to you, Victoria? Is that the shape of it?" She could not answer. She bowed her head over our joined hands and made a sound I had not heard from her in decades. Not crying. Something older and rawer than crying. Something that lives beneath the words a person uses for their grief. I looked at James. I looked at Rosa. "Would you give us a moment?" I said. "Just the two of us." James nodded. He gathered the folders with his customary precision and walked to the door. Rosa followed, her hand briefly touching my shoulder as she passed. The heavy glass door clicked shut behind them, and then it was just my daughter and me, alone in the wreckage of the afternoon, with 41 years of love and lies and roses and silences between us. I waited until her breathing steadied. Then I said, "I am going to ask you one question, Victoria, and I need you to tell me the truth. Not the lawyer's truth. Not the version you practiced in the car on the way here. The real one." She lifted her head. Her eyes were red and swollen. For the first time since she had walked through the conference room door, she looked like herself, like the person underneath all the ambition and the debt and the performance. "I am listening," she said. I took a slow breath. "Why?" Victoria looked at the floor for a long time before she answered. I had waited out longer silences than this one. 35 years of classrooms had taught me that the most important thing a person can say rarely comes quickly. It has to work its way up from somewhere deep, through layers of pride and fear and the carefully constructed story a person tells themselves about who they are and why they do the things they do. I did not rush her. I sat in my chair with my hands in my lap, and I waited. When she finally spoke, her voice was so quiet, I had to lean slightly forward to hear it. "I was always ashamed of you," she said. She did not say it with cruelty. She said it the way a person says a thing they have been carrying for so long that the weight of it has worn them smooth, flat, and exhausted, and finally, painfully honest. "I know that is terrible," she continued. "I know how that sounds. But you asked for the truth, and that is the truth." "Tell me," I said. She pulled her knees up to her chest, still sitting on the floor, and she looked at the window, the way children look at windows, when they are trying to describe something they cannot quite see clearly yet. "We were not poor," she said. "I know that. We always had enough. But enough was not what I saw when I looked at my friends at school. Their fathers drove new cars. Their mothers wore real jewelry. They went on vacations to places that had names I had never heard. And we had a small house on Abercorn Street with a garden, and a mother who packed my lunch in paper bags and drove a car that made a sound when it rained. She paused. At school I told people you were a professor, she said. Not a school teacher. A professor. It sounded more substantial. I told them you were working on a book. I told them Henry was an architect, not a carpenter. I was 11 years old and I was already lying, Mom. I had already decided that what we were was not enough. The words arrived in my chest like stones dropped into cold water. One by one. Sinking. When I got into law school, she continued, the gap felt bigger. The people around me had grown up in a different world. Their parents were partners at firms, judges, senators. They talked about things I had to pretend to understand. I worked twice as hard as any of them just to keep up, and even then I still felt like someone who had slipped in through a side door that was not meant for her. She looked at her hands. And then I met Marcus. His family had a name. A real one. Or so I believed. Diana told me at our first dinner that the Ashfords had been in Savannah since before the Civil War. She said it the way people say things they expect to impress you. And it did, because I had spent my whole life wanting to belong to something with roots, and the Ashfords looked like they had them. She stopped. A small, broken sound escaped her. Diana also made it very clear what was expected, she said. She told Marcus. At a dinner I was not supposed to hear. That if he was going to bring a girl from a schoolteacher's family into the Ashford name, that girl had better be exceptional in every other way. That she had better dress right, live right, present right. She looked at me directly for the first time since she had sat down on the floor. So I started spending, she said. Not because I wanted things, because I was terrified. Every dinner party, every charity event, every weekend in Hilton Head, I was performing. I was performing being someone I had invented, and the performance kept getting more expensive. And Marcus's practice was failing, and his debts were growing, and we were both performing for each other, and neither of us was willing to stop. She pressed the back of her hand against her mouth. And then Diana, she said. Catching herself on the name, suggested the plan. She said it was standard estate management for high net worth families. She said it happened all the time. She said it would be clean and quick, and that you would be better off. She said it with such certainty that I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe someone. She looked at me again, and this time her eyes were raw and open and entirely without strategy. I did not want to hurt you, Mom, she said. I want you to know that, whatever you decide, I did not think of you as an obstacle or a burden. I thought of you as, she hesitated, as the one thing I could not let anyone see. Because if they saw you, the real you, the school teacher with the paper bag lunches and the 14-year-old Honda, they would see me. They would see where I came from, and I could not bear that. I let her words settle in the room. I let them sit there between us, where they needed to sit. Then I said, being a school teacher's daughter was never small, Victoria. The children I taught became doctors and engineers and judges and teachers. I planted seeds in people for 35 years, and every single one of them grew. Your shame of that was never about me. It was about you. It was about a lie you told yourself at 11 years old and never stopped telling. Victoria nodded. One slow, defeated nod. I used to love the roses, she said suddenly. Her voice had changed. It was softer now, stripped of everything except what was underneath. Do you remember? On Saturday mornings you would let me help you water them. I used to think the red ones were the most beautiful things I had ever seen. My hands began to tremble. Not from age. Not from cold. From the weight of 20 years of distance compressed into a single sentence about roses on Saturday mornings, and a little girl in a yellow dress who still lived somewhere inside the woman sitting on the floor in front of me. I used to wonder when she had stopped seeing them. Now I knew. She had not stopped seeing them. She had only taught herself not to look. I stood up. It was a slow movement. Deliberate. The way I used to stand up from my desk at the front of a classroom when a lesson was about to begin in earnest. Victoria watched me rise from the chair. She was still sitting on the floor, still folded in on herself, still small in a way I had not seen her since she was a child. I walked around the end of the table. My footsteps were quiet on the carpet. I stopped in front of her. She looked up at me. I raised my right hand and I slapped her. Not gently. Not as a gesture. Hard. The way a person strikes when they have been holding something back for a very long time and the body finally decides it is finished holding. The sound of it filled the empty conference room and bounced off the glass walls and came back to us, sharp and irreversible. Victoria's head snapped to the side. A red mark bloomed immediately along her cheekbone. She did not raise her hand. She did not cry out. She did not move away. She stayed exactly where she was, head turned, and she accepted it. And in that acceptance, I saw something I had not seen from her in this room all day. Something honest. That, I said, is for every night I lay in that nursing home bed in the dark and called your name and heard nothing. That is for every morning I woke up in a room with a view of a parking lot and thought about my roses and wondered if you were watering them. That is for the look on your face when they walked me out of my garden in my slippers while your husband photographed my house for a realtor. Victoria said nothing. Her jaw was tight. Her eyes were wet, but she was not letting herself cry yet. She was still holding herself together with the last of whatever was left. And then I did something that surprised us both. I lowered myself to the floor in front of her. My knees protested, the way knees do at 73. But I did not care. I sat down in front of my daughter on the carpet of that expensive conference room, and I put my arms around her, and I held her. She broke. There is no other word for it. The composure, the white blazer, the lawyer, the ambition, the 41 years of carefully managed distance, all of it gave way at once. She buried her face in my shoulder, and she wept with her whole body. The kind of crying that does not make any sound at first, because it is too large to fit through a human throat. And this, I said into her hair, this is because you are still my daughter. You are a fool, Victoria. A terrible, terrible fool who threw away something real for something that was never going to love you back. But you are mine. You have always been mine. And that does not stop just because you forgot it. We stayed like that on the floor of the conference room for a long time. The afternoon light moved across the windows. The city outside went about its business. And inside, in the wreckage of everything my daughter had built and broken, we held on to each other the way people hold on when there is nothing left to hold on to except each other. When her breathing finally steadied, I sat back. I wiped my own eyes with the back of my hand. I took a long breath. Then I said, "Listen to me carefully, Victoria. What happens next is up to you. James has a file that he can walk to the district attorney's office tomorrow morning. And what is in that file will end your career and a significant portion of your freedom. That is one path." She nodded. "One slow movement. The other path," I said, "has conditions. 7 of them. They are not negotiable, and they do not come with a timeline for renegotiation. You will either accept all of them right now, or I will call James back in here, and we will take the first path. Do you understand?" "Yes," she said. "First, you will enter therapy within the week. Not once a month. Not when it is convenient. Weekly sessions with a licensed counselor, for as long as they determine necessary. You have been running from yourself for 40 years, and it is time to stop." She nodded. "Second, you will sign the divorce papers James has prepared. You will waive all claims to any community property, present or future. There is nothing to claim, as you know, but I want it done cleanly and completely. Third, a permanent restraining order against Marcus Ashford and Diana Ashford, 500 miles. They are poison, Victoria, and you let them in. That door closes permanently. Fourth, you will complete 300 hours of volunteer service at Magnolia Pines, the same facility where you placed me. You will work alongside the staff. You will learn the names of the residents. You will sit with the ones whose families do not visit." Victoria's throat moved. "Fifth, You will return to teaching. You will begin as a substitute, and you will earn your way back. You are your mother's daughter. Whatever else you have become, and it is time you remembered what that means. Sixth, I said. You will live at 714 Abercorn Street. Victoria's face lifted with something fragile and cautious. In the garden shed, I said. The fragile thing collapsed. The garden shed, she said. Mom, that is where you keep the tools. The fertilizer. The old pots. Yes, I said. It has a window. I had Rosa convert it to a room. It is small and it is simple, and it is more than you gave me at Magnolia Pines. She was quiet. And seventh, I said. Every morning at 6 o'clock, before anything else, you will water the roses. She looked at me for a long moment. The red mark on her cheek was darkening. Her mascara was beyond repair. Her white blazer had a smudge on the sleeve from the floor. You have a great deal of fixing to do, Victoria, I said. The shed is where the tools are kept. That seems appropriate. She looked at her hands. She looked at the window. She looked at me. Yes, Mom, she said. I accept. I called James and Rosa back in. James set the papers on the table with his customary precision, and Victoria signed every one without hesitation. The divorce filing, the restraining order applications, the full and detailed confession, which she signed last, with a steady hand that surprised me. I watched my daughter sign away the life she had built on lies, and for the first time since they had carried me out of my garden in my slippers, I saw something flicker in her eyes that had nothing to do with strategy or performance or fear. It was small. It was fragile. It was uncertain, but it was real. And in a garden, real is the only thing that matters. 3 weeks after the meeting at the Savannah Bank Tower, the world outside my garden gate caught up with the Ashfords. It did not arrive all at once. It came the way consequences usually come, quietly at first, in small official envelopes and phone calls, and the slow withdrawal of things a person took for granted. Then louder. Then all at once, James called on a Tuesday morning. I was in the garden, on my knees in the dirt for the first time in nearly a month, pressing a new cutting into the soil near the base of Henry's crimson floribunda. The earth was warm and dark and familiar under my hands. I had been waiting for this. Not the phone call, but this. My fingers in the ground. The smell of it. The particular silence that lives in a garden when everything is exactly as it should be. I set the trowel down and answered. Lewis, James said, using my name the way he always did when the news was significant. I wanted to give you the final summary on the other parties. It is officially over. Tell me, I said. He began with Marcus. The Georgia Composite Medical Board met last Thursday. Dr. Ashford's license has been formally suspended pending the outcome of the malpractice proceedings. Given the weight of evidence across all 3 cases, my contacts at the board believe revocation is likely within the quarter. His surgical privileges at Mercy General were terminated 2 weeks ago. The hospital released a brief statement, citing ongoing legal matters. I thought of Marcus walking out of that conference room with his jacket straightened and his phone in his hand. I thought of the practiced smile. The navy blue suit bought on credit. Karen Wells, James continued, terminated her employment at Mercy General the day after the conference room meeting. She resigned without notice. My investigator found she has since accepted a position at a hospital in Charlotte. She did not contact Marcus before she left. A man reduced to his worst choices, I thought, finds that even those choices do not stay. And his mother? I asked. James paused. And in that pause I heard something that in a lesser man might have been satisfaction. The news about Diana Ashford reached Savannah social circles faster than either of us anticipated, he said. My investigator believes the bank manager mentioned it to his wife at dinner. By the following morning, 3 of Diana's club memberships had been quietly suspended pending review. By the end of the week, she had received formal letters from the Savannah Women's Club, the Historic Garden Society, and the Telfair Charity Board, all citing the same language: misrepresentation of personal background in membership applications. I looked at my rose garden. at the iron gate with the scrollwork E, at the 47 bushes Henry had planted, each one for a year of our marriage. Gerald Ashford, James continued. Marcus's father agreed to speak with my investigator without hesitation. He confirmed every detail of Diana's real history. He said, and I am quoting directly here, that he had known the truth for 30 years and had simply been waiting for someone to ask. Diana flew to Tuscaloosa the following Sunday, James said. She is currently staying with her younger sister in a house not far from the trailer park where she grew up. Her social accounts have been deactivated. Her phone number has been changed. By all appearances, Donna Mae Higgins has finally gone home. I sat quietly with that for a moment. I did not feel triumph. I felt something more complicated and more honest. I felt the particular sadness of watching a person spend an entire life running from themselves and finally run out of road. And Dr. Pierce? I asked. Surrendered his license voluntarily last week, James said. The medical board accepted it as part of an agreement with the state attorney's office. Criminal charges for fraud and falsification of medical records were filed on Friday. He is cooperating with prosecutors. His attorney believes he will receive a suspended sentence in exchange for full testimony. But his career is finished. I set my hand flat on the warm earth beside me. Thank you, George, I said, and then caught myself. James. I apologize. Thank you, James. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Ellie, you are welcome. Rosa and Miguel had moved in 2 weeks prior. They took the 2 rooms on the upper floor, the ones with the windows that looked out over the garden. Miguel was a carpenter, quiet and steady, with the same quality of attention to material things that Henry had possessed. On his first weekend, he repaired the loose board on the porch steps without being asked. On his second, he rebuilt the composting frame at the far end of the garden that had been tilting since the previous winter. Rosa was 4 months pregnant, a fact she had been holding quietly through all of it, waiting for the right moment to share. She told me on the morning after she moved in, sitting at my kitchen table with both hands around a cup of tea, looking both terrified and luminous in the way that only pregnant women and people who have just made an irreversible good decision look luminous. I held her hands across the table and I wept. And she laughed at me, crying. And then she wept too. And we sat there together in my kitchen in the morning light, and the house felt, for the first time in 5 years, like a home that was full of something it had been missing. The nursery would be in the small room at the top of the stairs. Rosa wanted gray. I wanted something warmer. We were, as of that Tuesday, in active and loving disagreement about it. Victoria completed her first volunteer shift at Magnolia Pines on a Saturday morning. She arrived at 8 o'clock and worked until 2, helping with the meal service and sitting with residents in the common room. Nurse Brenda, the same woman who had taken my phone on my first day, told me later that Victoria had spent an hour with Mrs. Chen, the woman in the room next to mine, who had been placed there by her son so he could sell her restaurant. They talked about food, Brenda said. Your daughter told her about a restaurant she used to love downtown. Mrs. Chen told her about her menu. They were laughing. It was not redemption. It was not even close to redemptions. It was simples, earlier and smaller and more important. It was the first deliberate step in a direction that was not away. On her way out of Magnolia Pines that Saturday afternoon, Victoria passed the common room. And there, in his customary armchair with his Wall Street Journal folded on his lap, was Judge Walter Franklin. He looked up at her. So, he said, you are Ellie's daughter. Yes, sir, Victoria said. Her voice was quiet. She was wearing plain clothes. No blazer. No jewelry. Walter studied her the way a judge studies a person who has just entered his courtroom and whose character he is still forming a view of. Then he said, she spoke about you every single day while she was in here, you know. Every single day. Even after what you did. The moment she woke up, and the last thing before she closed her eyes. Every day, Victoria did not answer. She stood in the doorway of the common room with her hand on the frame, And Walter returned to his newspaper, and she stood there for a long time before she walked on. She did not mention it when she returned to the garden shed that evening. She did not need to. I could see it in the way she moved, something slightly slower, slightly more burdened, and more real than before. On the battered wooden step outside the garden shed door, she found a terracotta pot no larger than a soup bowl. In it, a single rose cutting, newly rooted, barely 2 inches tall, with one small leaf unfurling at the top like a question. Beside it, a folded piece of paper in my handwriting. Every garden starts with one. Love. 6 months after the afternoon in the conference room, the dining table at 714 Abercorn Street was set for 5. It was the second Sunday of October, which is the finest time of year in Savannah. The brutal summer heat has finally released its hold on the city, and the air comes in from the coast carrying something cooler and cleaner, the smell of fallen leaves and distant rain, and the particular sweetness of the Confederate jasmine that climbs the fence on the east side of my garden. The light in October comes at a different angle, lower and warmer, the kind of light that makes even ordinary things look as though they have been considered carefully before being placed. Rosa had made her grandmother's roasted chicken. Miguel had baked his mother's cornbread, which came out of the oven, the color of old gold, and smelled like every good kitchen I had ever known. I had made the lemon pound cake, the same recipe I had been making since 1978, the one written on an index card in my mother's handwriting that lived in a small wooden box on my kitchen counter. The house smelled like everything that home is supposed to smell like: warmth and butter, and someone taking care. Judge Walter Franklin sat at one end of the table in a clean gray cardigan, looking more like himself than he had in any of the months I had known him. He had moved out of Magnolia Pines 3 weeks prior, at the gentle but persistent urging of Rosa and Miguel, who had converted the small sitting room off the hallway into a comfortable bedroom with a reading chair and a lamp with the right kind of bulb for a man of 80 who still read for 3 hours every evening. He had accepted their invitation with the dignified reluctance of a man who had decided, without quite admitting it, that he was not finished yet. He was in the middle of telling Miguel about a case he had presided over in 1994, involving a dispute over a racehorse, a forged veterinary certificate, and a defendant who had arrived in court wearing the horse's previous owner's cufflinks. Miguel was leaning forward with his elbows on the table and his cornbread forgotten, entirely captivated. Rosa was laughing, one hand resting on the considerable curve of her stomach. 7 months along now, and luminous with it. She and I had reached a resolution on the nursery. Warm ivory on the walls, with a deep blue border at the chair rail, which she insisted was the blue of the Savannah sky in November, and I agreed was beautiful, which was what mattered. And at the far end of the table, in the chair that 6 months ago had been empty in my house for 5 years, sat Victoria. She was different. Not transformed, not healed, not the conclusion of a lesson. Just genuinely, visibly different in the small ways that matter more than large ones. Her hair was pulled back practically rather than styled for effect. She wore no jewelry. Her hands, resting on either side of her plate, were not the soft hands of a woman who had spent her career behind a desk. The knuckles were lightly calloused. There was a faint permanent stain along the edge of her right thumb from the potting soil she worked with every morning at 6 o'clock. She was a substitute teacher at Savannah Elementary for 4 months before the school offered her a permanent position in the 4th grade classroom, the same building where I had taught for 31 of my 35 years. She had called me the evening they offered it. From the garden shed, her voice unsteady. "They want me to stay, Mom," she said. "The regular teacher." "I know," I said. "I told the principal you were available when she asked me last month." She was quiet. "You told her about me?" she said. "I told her you were your mother's daughter," I said, "and that you just needed someone to give you the right classroom." At the table, Miguel had dissolved into laughter at the conclusion of Walter's horse story, which apparently involved the defendant attempting to return the cufflinks mid-sentencing. Rosa was wiping her eyes. Walter was wearing the expression of a man deeply satisfied with the effect of a well-told story. "Victoria," Miguel said, still laughing. Did anything like that ever happen in your cases? She looked up from her plate. She smiled. A real one. Smaller and less polished than the smile she used to wear, but entirely hers. Once, she said. A client showed up for a deposition wearing the opposing counsel's parking pass on his lanyard. He had found it in the elevator. The table erupted. I watched my daughter laugh with people who were not performing for her and whom she was not performing for, and I felt something shift in my chest. Not the grief of what had been lost. Something forward-facing. Something that recognized beginnings. After dinner, Rosa and Miguel began clearing the plates. Walter excused himself to his reading chair with a cup of tea and the contentment of a man who has been fed well and laughed well and asked for nothing more. I went to the front porch. The evening air was cool and sweet. The mockingbird was still in the magnolia tree, as it had been every evening since I came home, singing its complicated borrowed song into the October dusk. I sat in Henry's rocking chair and listened. Victoria came through the screen door a few minutes later. She stood for a moment with her hands in the pockets of her plain dark jeans, looking at the garden in the fading light. Then she sat in the chair beside mine. We sat quietly for a while. She pulled 2 envelopes from her pocket and held them out. The first one is thicker, slightly soft from being carried all day. The second is smaller, a card envelope sealed with a strip of tape. This is the first one, she said. Her voice was careful and direct, the way she spoke now, without decoration. It is 2 months of savings from my teaching salary. $200. I know what that is against what I owe. But it is the first payment. I took the envelope. I held it. At this rate, I said, it will take you approximately 11,000 years to pay off the debt in full. She did not laugh. She did not apologize. She met my eyes and said, I know, Mom. I am going to need to get overtime. I put the envelope in the breast pocket of my cardigan, over my heart. And the second one? I asked. She handed me the card. I opened it. Inside, in her handwriting, a single line. Thank you for not giving up on me. I folded it back along its crease and held it in my lap. Victoria looked at the garden. I fixed the gate this morning, she said. The upper hinge was starting to rust. I sanded it back and retreated the metal. It should hold through winter. I looked at the gate. At the scrollwork E in the ironwork, which Henry had forged by hand 40 years ago. And the roses? I asked. She looked down at her calloused hands. I watered them before dawn, she said. Before you were up. I did not want to wake you. I sat in Henry's chair in the October evening with $200 over my heart and a thank you card in my lap, listening to the mockingbird, looking at the iron gate my husband had built for me, and I could not find the right word for what I felt. It was not happiness. Happiness was too thin, too bright, too simple. It was something heavier and more enduring, something that had roots. Victoria said goodnight and walked back to the garden shed, her footsteps quiet on the porch boards. And I sat alone in Henry's rocking chair and listened to the sound of the house settling into the evening around me. From upstairs came the muffled, comfortable sound of Rosa and Miguel talking, the rise and fall of 2 voices that belonged together, punctuated by Rosa's laugh, which was the kind of laugh that made rooms feel larger. Through the sitting room window I could see the warm glow of Walter's reading lamp, the shadow of his hand turning a page. The mockingbird had gone quiet at last. The street was still. The October air moved through the garden with the unhurried patience of something that has been doing this for a very long time and intends to keep doing it long after everything else has changed. I looked at the iron gate. It was open. Victoria had left it open when she came up to the porch, and in the October dusk it stood ajar, the scrollwork E visible against the darker shapes of the street beyond it. An invitation, rather than a boundary. Henry had said a garden gate should welcome people in, not keep them out. I had been thinking about that for 6 months. I had been thinking about how I had watched it close behind me in the back window of a white van, and how that closing had felt like the end of something, and now it was open again. And the woman who had left it open was a 41-year-old teacher with calloused hands who watered my roses before dawn. I thought of Henry. "You would not recognize her," I said to him. Not out loud. I said it the way I always talked to him. Quietly, in the back of my mind where he had lived for the past 5 years. "She is learning how to be real," I said. "It is taking longer than it should, and it is costing more than it should, and it is the most important thing she has ever done." I could almost hear him. He had always been a man of few words, but the words he chose were the right ones. He would have said something like, "Well, some roots take a long time to take hold, Ellie. Give them the right soil." I thought about what I had lost. I had lost the daughter I thought I was raising, the polished, ambitious, perfectly presented woman in the white blazer who came to my house once a month and asked how I was with her eyes already on the door. That daughter was gone. The woman in the garden shed with the calloused hands and the $200 envelope and the thank you card written in her own handwriting, that was someone newer and realer and more worth knowing. I had also lost 6 months of my life to a nursing home I should never have been in. I had lost a season of roses I did not get to tend. I had lost the mornings Henry and I used to share in the garden, which I had been recreating alone, and which I was now, slowly, learning to recreate with other people. But I had found James Okafor, who had kept my secret faithfully for 18 years, and defended it, with precision, when the moment came. I had found Walter Franklin, a federal judge who chose a nursing home common room as his courtroom. Because justice, he told me once, does not require a bench, only attention. I had found Rosa and Miguel, and the small life growing inside her, a child who would be born into a house full of books and good food and a garden tended by people who understood that the things worth having require patience. And I had found, buried under 41 years of ambition and shame, and the particular loneliness of a woman performing a life rather than living one, the faint but unmistakable outline of my daughter. I am not a person given to grand statements. I spent 35 years teaching children that the most important things are usually the smallest ones. A single sentence, read aloud correctly for the first time by a child who believed she could not read. A seed pressed into dark earth with a finger. A gate left open at the end of an October evening. I want to tell you what I believe this story is about, because I think about it now, in the quiet of the porch, and I want to say it plainly. It is not about the trust, though the trust was the instrument. It is not about the clause, though the clause was the protection. It is not even about the $28 million, which is a number and nothing more. It is about the difference between price and value. Victoria and the Ashfords spent years understanding the price of everything and the value of nothing. They looked at my simple house and saw $500,000. They looked at my roses and saw a swimming pool. They looked at me and saw an obstacle. They measured everything in terms of what it could be sold for. And in doing so, they missed the only thing worth measuring, which is what a thing, or a person, genuinely is. God gives us the people we need, not always the people we expect. Rosa came back to me as an heir, but she had always been a daughter in the ways that matter most. Walter arrived as a stranger in a common room and became the witness my justice required. James kept a secret for 18 years and delivered it at exactly the right moment. I do not believe that was coincidence. I believe God works, even in the silence, even in the narrow bed of a nursing home room, even when your own daughter has told the world you have lost your mind. He was there. He has always been there. And I learned, in the most painful classroom of my life, that faith is not the absence of betrayal. It is the decision to keep tending the garden anyway. I believe in planting things. I believe in the long, patient work of putting seeds in the ground and watering them and waiting and not giving up when the season is hard. I believe that the most powerful thing a human being can do for another is to stay, to show up, to say, "I see you, and I am not leaving." That is what I did for Rosa, once, on the floor of a classroom with her shoes off and a glass of milk I paid for myself. And it is what I am trying to do now for Victoria, who is learning, slowly and imperfectly, and one calloused hand at a time, what her mother was trying to teach her all along. If this story reached you in some way, I would be grateful to know. Tell me in the comments what stayed with you. Tell me which part of it felt true. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Someone who is tending something that is taking a long time to grow. Subscribe if you would like to hear more. Turn on the notifications. And know that wherever you are, whatever garden you are tending, it is worth the work. One final note before you go. Some details in this story were changed to better carry the lesson. Any resemblance to real names or situations is unintentional, but the truth at the center of it is real. It has always been real. I sat in Henry's chair until the stars came out over Savannah. Then I got up, walked to the garden gate, and left it open. Some things should always be left open.